Matt Streb, political science professor and faculty athletic rep at NIU. I'm sure you understand what kind of morning we're having.
Oh, yeah.
How are you, man? Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. I'm a little tired, but other than that, I'm doing okay.
We were speculating last night. I went with the Matt rode this horse until the end. There was some thought that perhaps you might have gone to bed because you're a human being after all who has to get out of bed in the morning. Which one is it?
I rode the horse to the end. I'll tell you that.
So.
I also would like to yield my time this morning, Riley, to somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about.
We don't know anyone like that. None of us seem to really know how this was going to go down. You know, after my daughter voted in her first presidential election. Yesterday. That's what it was. And as we were in the car, she goes, "Well, what do you think's going to happen?" She goes, "You haven't even said at home what you thought was going to happen. What's going to happen?" I said, "Well, I have no clue. Here's 3 possible scenarios." So that's really not telling someone what you think's going to happen.
Well, I think a couple things. I mean, certainly, one thing I will say that is anybody who tells you they know what happened yesterday is just wrong, right? I mean, this takes a long time to kind of sort through the data, figure out what exactly is going on. I can tell you some things I'm looking at this morning.
Sure.
I think one thing that's interesting, first of all, let me just start off with a couple things. I mean, I will say, I wish you had my introduction there because my introduction with my soundbite was this thing's a heck of a lot closer than most people think. So,
and you have said that all along. So I think you were right on the money.
I will say that, but I also will say that I certainly wasn't predicting that Trump was going to win. Here's the thing, though. I thought, if you look at the map, right, it didn't surprise me that he was going to win North Carolina, Ohio. I fully expected that. Certainly Iowa.
Even Ohio, you thought?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did. I mean, in the polls, that actually looked like the polls there were about the only accurate thing we saw last night, right?
Yeah.
Florida was a toss-up, and I guess at the last minute I would have kind of given Clinton a small lead in Florida, but that was mostly because I was hearing about the early turnout among Hispanics. I think Nevada was a toss-up, but as I told you, 100 times, as long as she held the so-called blue wall, she was fine. She could lose all those states. And the fact that, he went into Michigan and beat her, went into Wisconsin. Actually, Michigan technically hasn't been called yet, but he's up right now. Went into Wisconsin and beat her. Came back in Pennsylvania and beat her. They're neck and neck right now in New Hampshire. Pretty astonishing stuff. And here's one of the things I think is interesting. I would be very careful reading too much into exit polls. This morning. But one thing I will show you. One of the things that I was wondering whether this would happen was we talked about, I think one of the reasons why people had a tough time thinking about Donald Trump as president was because there seemed to be this incredible division within the Republican Party. And I think that I, along with many other people, made a huge mistake there. I'm not sure there was a division within the Republican Party in terms of the rank-and-file electorate. I think the division was in the Republican Party among the Republican Party elite.
Yep.
Let me tell you right now what the exit poll shows. And again, I want to take this with a grain of salt in a sense, but here's something I think is absolutely astonishing. According to the exit poll, all right, there were more Democrats who voted for Trump than Republicans that voted for Clinton. That's pretty astonishing, I think.
That really is. What does that say to us?
Well, I think what it says, first of all, is that party ID does matter. Right? I heard somebody say, "Oh, it just shows that party ID doesn't matter." Oh, no, it shows that I think Republicans came home. They voted for Trump. They ended up saying, and as we've said 100 times, he wasn't running against Franklin Roosevelt, right? Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate in so many different ways.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of Republicans, I'm hearing Democrats this morning talking about how they can't see how anybody could vote for Trump. There are a lot of Republicans, but maybe they don't really like Clinton. There are a lot of Republicans who are saying, I don't really like Trump, but I can't see how anybody could vote for Hillary Clinton. And I will say, I did say all along, if I was Clinton, I would have far rather run against Ted Cruz than Donald Trump for exactly this reason, because Trump is difficult to predict, right? And, there didn't seem, he talked about winning the Rust Belt. There didn't seem to be any evidence that he was winning the Rust Belt, but he certainly, strong turnout It looks like in rural areas. If you look at, in Michigan, there was a bad turnout in the Detroit area, for instance. There wasn't great turnout in Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which is where Cleveland is. I think there's, I want to be very clear. Certainly, I didn't predict this, and I'm probably as surprised as anybody this morning. But there were some signs that I think indicated that this could have happened. I just really thought that the blue wall was going to hold. I thought she would win. I thought she would win by a small margin. And obviously, I and many other people were wrong.
Well, and the one of the things that leaps up at me this morning is what we were told over and over and over again about what a drag on the down ticket that Trump was going to be. Not only was this going to be, he was going to implode and Hillary was going to waltz in there, but, he was going to wipe out everybody in the party below him.
Well, that's, and I thought that was a possibility. I mean, I think that goes back to, political science took a hit in this election. There's no doubt about that. But the one thing that political science will tell you is that people are partisans. And people vote as partisans. And it's tough to tell, whether there were actual coattails that Trump brought with him or whether people were motivated to go to actually vote to try to keep control of the Senate, and Trump maybe benefited from that. I mean, those are the types of things that I'm saying we have to really kind of dig through and figure out. But Tammy Duckworth was it. Right? I mean, that was it. Ron Johnson, was down in the polls to Russ Feingold throughout the entire summer and most of the fall. Now, what was interesting is that, I said that Democrats had to win Illinois and Wisconsin to get to a majority. Johnson did start closing the polls a little bit in the last couple of days, and if you started to look, I mean, there were some signs. It weren't a lot, but there were some signs to show that Johnson might have been in a close race in Wisconsin. That maybe the presidential race in Michigan, was tighter than people were thinking. But yeah, I mean, what an astonishing night! It really is pretty amazing.
It's a mind blower. But here's one thing that jumps out at me, and I'd love to get your take on this one. For the past, I noticed the numbers had gone up over the last 6 months or so, but for quite a long while, a pretty good plurality of people have, when polled, have said they believe the country's going in the wrong direction.
Right.
Over the last 2 weeks, I saw that number go as high as 72% in some polls. The lowest I saw it was at 64%.
Right.
To me, right there is an indicator that kind of got overlooked because all of these people are saying it's not going in the right direction. Maybe they drew the parallel or drew the thought that, well, the election of Hillary is going to continue the direction that we're going in.
I think that's a good point, Riley. That's something in political science we call retrospective voting, right? Where you look at kind of the how things are and whether you're happy. And if you're happy, you vote for the incumbent, and if you're not happy, you vote for the challenger or the challenger to the incumbent's party in this case. And so. Yeah, I think there is, something to be said for that. And I think that one thing that we saw too, and I did say this a couple of weeks ago, was you saw a fairly significant number of undecided voters still late into the campaign. And independents looks like, again, I don't want to make too much of this, but according to the exit polls, independents went, pretty solidly for Trump. And so there could have been kind of a movement among independents. That was, I will tell you, that was making people like Nate Silver a little nervous, right? I mean, pollsters this morning are going to take a huge hit. And Nate Silver was somebody who said, look, I mean, he was the most cautious of these kind of prognosticators, right? He had, at one point, he had Clinton, about the probability of Clinton winning last week was about 60%. So a 60-40 split, that's not a huge difference, right? A little bit more than a flip of the coin. He was worried about the number of undecided voters. And undecided voters this late into an election are incredibly hard to poll and incredibly hard to predict, because if they're going to be in the electorate, they're going to vote a certain way, but they're not going to be captured accurately in your polls. So there are a variety of things this morning that I think people are kind of scratching their heads about. But yeah, I mean, I guess hindsight is always 20/20. I did think the election was closer than it than I think most people thought. I told you before, I never thought this could be a blowout because the country is so polarized.
Right.
And both candidates have such high negatives. It stunned me when people thought that Clinton was running away with this thing. But I will tell you, I would be lying if I didn't tell you that when, when the polls closed last night, I, like everybody else, fully thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. And so it was absolutely an astonishing night. I wasn't alive in 1948.
Nope.
When Harry Truman kind of came out of nowhere, it seemed to beat Tom Dewey.
My dad was fond of recalling that one because he was a Truman guy and remembered going to bed and feeling very dispirited that this just wasn't going to work out, and then waking up the next morning and laughing along with Truman with the Tribune's headline.
Well, here's the thing, Riley. The thing that was amazing about 1948 was Truman was so unpopular in September.
Huge.
This was the infancy of scientific polling, and people stopped polling because they thought the election was over. So there was actually a switch. There was a change in the electorate that was never captured because people weren't polling. What is so astonishing about this election and makes this in some ways even more surprising is we have 8 bazillion polls out there, right? And,
right.
They showed a tightening, and I think that's one thing you're going to have to look at too. Is how did so many people? It wasn't just one polling outfit, right? And it wasn't just in one state. How did so many people get this wrong? And I think one of the things that is a possibility is one of the first times, you may not even remember this, one of the first times that I ever went on your show, it was because I had published an article back in 2007 on social desirability and support for a female president. And essentially what we were saying was people will tell you in a poll they'd support a female president, but when they actually go in to vote, they won't do it. And they'll tell you they'll vote for a female president because it's a social desirable thing to do, right? You don't want to say, no, I'm not going to vote for a female president. Right. There could have been some of that going on, but I actually think it was the opposite, right? I think people were not telling you they were going to vote for Donald Trump because they felt uncomfortable doing so, because there was so much negativity about Trump, and that may have deflated the polls, and Trump may have underperformed in the polls because of that. I want to be very, very, very clear. I don't have any concrete evidence of that, but that certainly is, a hypothesis, I think, that one could go in and look at it.
Well, and to add to that, anecdotally, I talked to a neighbor of mine who said, hey, have you gotten a call from a pollster yet? I said, yeah, a couple have called the house. He said, yeah, one called the other night, and I knew he was a Trump guy, Trump signs and all that. I said, so you told him Trump all the way? He goes, no, I told him I hadn't decided yet.
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. I mean, if that is, I obviously said it's one case, but if that's widespread, Trump is going to underperform, and he's going to underperform pretty consistently across the board in a variety of different states, and maybe even more so in heavily Democratic states, like what should have been heavily Democratic states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, those types of places. So, man, what a crazy thing. I mean, I guess. We've talked about how dispirited we were about this election, and
right.
What I hope going forward is that we can find a way to, just to improve the quality of the rhetoric of what we're talking about.
Boy, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, to where people aren't reaching for Xanax during an election cycle.
Yeah, I still just get very, very concerned about the level of rhetoric on both sides, and it just, we live in a great country, and we had a wonderful privilege to go yesterday and vote. And certainly it was a surprising election result.
But one of the joys of being an American is you don't know how these things are going to turn out. And there's a lot of countries in this world where they know ahead of time, and everybody knows ahead of time exactly what's going to happen.
Well, and Riley, this is, to use a sports analogy, this is why you play the game, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, all sorts of people, including myself, can go on, the radio or go on television or whatever, tell you, what they think is going to happen. At the end of the day, the American public gets to make the case. And one thing that we haven't talked about, I mean, this is astonishing. The last time I looked, Clinton actually was winning the popular vote, right? And it was, there were more than 110 million people who cast their ballots yesterday.
Right.
Right? And it was about 150,000 people the last time I looked that separated Clinton and Trump in the popular vote. I mean, that is, if you talk about a neck-and-neck race from a popular vote perspective and to show kind of how polarized I think the country is, That kind of sums it up right there.
It really does.
Absolutely fascinating.
If you like a pitcher's duel in politics, there you have it.